By 2013, Nokia's share of the global smartphone market dropped to 3%. 3 years prior, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy, carrying over $900 million in debt. These collapses occurred despite both companies possessing massive capital. In 2007, Nokia earned over 50% of all profits in the mobile industry. In the late 90s, Blockbuster owned 9,000 stores and held 65 million registered customers. They had complete market dominance. The massive cash reserves visible on these balance sheets obscured a fatal structural fracture. The question is exactly what structural flaw causes a resource-rich market leader to suddenly shatter under the weight of disruption. Capital and existing market share cannot save an enterprise that lacks internal structural adaptation. Business schools teach static environmental analysis frameworks. You map out the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal landscape using the PESTLE framework. A static checklist is an insufficient diagnostic tool for preventing organizational obsolescence. It tells you what variables exist right now, not how your company will respond when those variables shift. Surviving disruption requires replacing static external observation with dynamic, systemic internal alignment. True organizational resilience requires the synthesis of 3 distinct operational layers. You cannot accurately predict the future. Therefore, an organization must architect its internal orientation to safely process external market shocks when they inevitably arrive. The foundational layer of this architectural model is employee orientation. The primary psychological objective at this level is achieving what researchers term organizational identification, or OID. OID occurs when there is an exact alignment between an individual's personal identity and the collective identity of the organization. To understand how this functions, we look at Meyer and Allen's organizational commitment model. First is normative commitment, where an employee stays out of a sense of moral obligation or debt to the employer. Second is continuance commitment. Here, an employee stays because the financial or social costs of leaving the organization are simply too high. The third component is affective commitment. This is the requirement for surviving disruption. Affective commitment means the employee genuinely wants to stay. Operating with high affective commitment, the workforce acts as a unified entity, instantly shifting direction together. When leadership treats onboarding as a mandatory HR checklist rather than a community-building system, they fail to develop this psychological bond. Without affective commitment, voluntary turnover spikes. This immediately strips the firm of the human agility required to execute a complex strategic pivot. Stacked above the employee foundation is the second layer, management orientation. This layer acts as the central processor of the organization. This framework shows how businesses handle stakeholder demands through a simple sequence: inputs, processes, and outputs. Management orientation operates within the processes chevron, acting as the critical bottleneck where external data is either accepted or ignored. When a leadership team processes data, they can adopt a reactive management orientation. The fatal flaw of the reactive model is its exclusive focus on short-term shareholder value. It prioritizes leveraging inside-out assets and ignores external market needs. In the late 90s, Blockbuster embodied this reactive state. Executives focused entirely on optimizing profits from late fees and physical video stores. By 2008, Blockbuster's CEO dismissed the growing threat of Netflix and their DVD-by-mail service. The reactive processor completely failed to register a direct external threat. Contrast this failure with the mechanics of a responsible management orientation. A responsible management team processes the firm as a dependent node within a larger ecosystem. They actively seek and absorb external input from these sources. A management orientation closed to external societal inputs will flawlessly optimize a business model right up until the exact moment it becomes obsolete. The highest systemic tier is the integrative orientation. This diagram maps the theoretical pathways a business can take to interact with the market. The pathway required for disruption survival is the integrative approach, defined by the bidirectional arrows flowing between business and market. This represents an outside-in positioning. It dictates that strategy must begin by diagnosing external societal and market needs. The ultimate goal of the integrative pathway is to co-create sustainable value in tandem with the market, solving external issues as the starting point for profit. Nokia serves as the definitive negative proof for this layer. They passed the technological test, but failed the integrative test. Driven by an inside-out orientation, Nokia possessed incredible internal capacity. They consistently invested in research and development, inventing their first smartphone in 1996. However, their management failed to integrate the external ecosystem shift, underestimating their rapid transition to software applications and touchscreen interfaces. Possessing advanced research and development yields no advantage in the long term if the organization lacks the integrative orientation to align with societal demands. The tri-orientational framework unites these layers into a single operational architecture. These three tiers operate as a singular, dependent biological system. The downward dependency is clear. An integrative market strategy is impossible to execute if the management orientation remains reactive and closed to external inputs. The upward dependency is equally rigid. Management cannot force a strategic market pivot without the effective commitment of its employees to execute the change. Stakeholder engagement provides the firm's literal mechanism for processing reality. This structural capability creates the active alignment required to prevent organizational obsolescence. The graveyard of disrupted legacy companies proves a specific rule. Long-term survival relies on a permanent, active alignment between internal human identity and external market disruption.